US Chess Championship started in St. Louis, featuring all the best American grandmasters, including Fabiano Caruana, Wesley So, Levon Aronian, and the one and only Hans Niemann in the open section, and the likes of Alice Lee, Jennifer Yee, Irina Krush in the women's section. Let's take a look at the best games of day 3. We have Wesley So playing white. Wesley So is the third best American grandmaster by rating, playing against Sam Shankland, who is ranked 11th in the country. Wesley So plays e4 and c6 from Sam Shankland. Caro-Kann defense, very solid, very defensive, very difficult to crack for white, but Wesley So accomplishes that. d4, d5, the most popular move here for white on the grandmaster level is e5, the advanced variation. Bishop goes to f5, h4, that's all theory. The pawn wants to go forward. Sam immediately blocks it with h5. Here white have two most critical moves: bishop d3 to exchange the bishops, or c4. And Wesley So prefers the move c4. We have e6. Sam Shankland creates this triangle of black pawns. Again, very difficult to break through. Knight develops to c3, exchange of the pawns on c4, knight to d7. Both players are developing their pieces, the bishops, the knights, and queen b6. The pawn on b2 is not under attack, as the square, although square b1 is protected right now by the bishop, but still taking the pawn on b2 will not be a good idea, as it will open the file b for the rook. So white plays castle, and black doesn't take that pawn on b2. Instead, they castle alongside, which looks pretty aggressive. Pretty interesting decision here. a3, Wesley So immediately starts attacking on the queen side of the board. The move b4 is next. Sam Shankland decided to move his king to safety with king b8, b4, king a8, and basically Sam lost two tempos with these moves. They were not necessary in this position. Probably he had to start attacking on the king side of the board, but instead he is getting pummeled on the queen side of the board. b5 immediately opening the position. Knight g4, a4, and a5 is on the way. So queen goes to a5 to block that pawn. Exchange of the pawns in c6, and now the pawn on c6 is really, really weak and vulnerable. White plays queen c1, kind of x-raying that pawn on c6. Rook b8, rook d1, rook d8, bishop a2, some maneuvering of the pieces, and knight goes to b6 to reposition itself to a juicy square on d5. Bishop g5, chess 101. You have a bad dark square bishop for white. I'm sorry. It's surrounded by the pawns that are also on dark squares. On the other hand, black's dark square bishop is a very good piece because it's surrounded by the pawns that are on white squares. So you want to exchange your bad bishop for opponent's good bishop. Sam Shankland doesn't allow it with the move f6, exchange of the pawns on f6, and now the pawn on e6 is weak, not supported by any other pawns. And Wesley So immediately strikes with knight f4, attacking the pawn with both the bishop and the knight. e5 is pretty much the only way to protect that pawn. Knight jumps to e6, exchange of the pieces on e6, and the rook takes d4. So now black has an extra pawn, but white have a better position after rook takes d4, pawn takes d4, knight e2. First of all, white have a pair of beautifully positioned bishops. Knight is attacking the pawn on d4, queen is attacking the pawn on c6. Sam plays queen c5 and seemingly protects everything. But here comes a5, attacking the knight. Knight goes to d5, and beautiful sacrifice of the knight. Knight takes d4. And now it turns out that black cannot take the knight on d4, because white will play queen takes c6 with the check. Rook b7 is the only move. Then they can just take the knight on f6, and let's say after bishop takes f6, play a6 and win the pinned rook. So they would be getting a winning position that way. Therefore, taking the knight on d4 is not good for black, and they play knight c3. Bishop e3, x-raying the queen, rook goes to d8, attacking the knight on d4. But the move that Sam missed here for white, and Wesley So pretty much said that during post-game interview, the move is queen f1, grandmaster type of move, not easy to find, but the idea of this move is that now black cannot take the knight on d4. Knight takes d4, rook takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4. Black have a material advantage, but the trick is that after rook takes d4, white do not take the rook on d4, but instead play queen a6, and that was the idea of the move queen f1. And there is no good way to defend from a checkmate on c8. Let's say if the rook goes to d8 to protect the square, then white simply will take the queen. So in this position, Sam Shanklin decides to play knight d5. Bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, and queen a6. And black's position is lost. They play bishop c5 and run into knight takes c6. Not only the rook is under attack, but also the pawn on a7 is under attack. So let's say if the rook goes away to, let's say, e8, then knight takes a7. There is an X rank of this knight by the bishop, so if bishop takes a7, queen takes a7, checkmate. And if black, let's say, take the bishop on e3, for example, then knight c6 with the checkmate, because the square on b8 is protected by the knight. So this is the idea. Position is lost, so Sam Shanklin decides to use a Hail Mary chance to create some perpetual check ideas. He takes the bishop on e3, sacrifices the rook on d8, and then sacrifices the bishop on f2. Bishop takes f2, king takes f2, and now king seems to be vulnerable, subject to many checks, but in reality it doesn't help black, because after one check, another check, black resigns. Why do they resign? Because there is only one check available in this position, which is queen d2 check, but king simply will go to h3. There is one more check available to black, which is queen d7 check, but the winning move is queen e6. And now black can take the knight on d8, but in that case, queen c6 check, and after king b8, queen takes c3, and white simply have an extra rook. Beautiful game by Wesley So, very nice win, and shows why he is one of the favorites in this tournament. The other game I want to show you is from women's section, and here we have 13-year-old Megan Paragua, the niece of a pretty well-known Filipino grandmaster Mark Paragua. So she's 13, playing white against one of the favorites of the tournament, second best ranked player in the United States, Alice Lee. Her games are always interesting because she is known for playing very aggressive style with sacrifices, and this game was not an exception. At the age of 16, she's like a veteran compared to 13-year-old Megan. The game started pretty slow, with knight f3, knight f6, d4, g6, e3, bishop g7, bishop e2, castle, castle, d5, very positional. Opening b3, developing the bishop on b2 or a3, c5, bishop b2, but this is calm before the storm. Exchange of the pawns on d4, knight c6, knight d2. Players are developing their pieces. c3, just another protection of the pawn on d4. Rook goes to an open file c, rook goes to an open file e, rook c7, knight f1, repositioning the knight to a square g3 to attack the bishop on f5, h5, knight g3. Black don't want to allow white to take the bishop on f5, so the bishop goes away to c8, bishop c1, queen d6,
not allowing the bishop to develop to a nice square f4, and bishop d3. Computer doesn't like this move because there is nothing to do here for this bishop. It's pretty sad looking at the pawn on g6. So this diagonal is shut down. Immediately Alice uses this move and jumps with the bishop to g4, creating a pin of the knight. a4, h4, attacking the knight. Bishop a3 first, attacking the queen. Queen goes away, knight goes away, and here is the critical point of the game, possibly. h3 plays Alice, and Megan had to take the pawn on h3. She played the more standard move, g3, and that was a critical mistake, because now the pawn on h3 is going to be a thorn in White's castle camp for the rest of the game, and pretty much will decide the game, because now the king does not have an escape square on g2 and pretty much stuck in a cage here, and that would be very important down the road. Bishop h6, very nice bishop, very nice diagonal, so cannot tolerate that bishop for White, immediately exchanging it. Bishop takes c1, rook takes c1, and immediately Alice Lee shows why she is so good in finding tactical motifs. Knight takes d4. What a move. Sacrificing the knight using all kinds of pins here. So now Megan takes the knight, rook takes c1, queen takes c1, and bishop takes f3, and black have an extra pawn. Queen e3, bishop just simply goes back to e4, exchange of the bishops, and knight goes to d2, attacking the pawn on e4. This pawn cannot be really protected, so because there are 3 attackers on that pawn right now and only 1 defender. So queen d5, let's say, does not help because it's still 3 on 2, and Alice activates the rook c8. Knight takes e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, and here is an important moment, rook c3, attacking the pawn on b3, and the problem for White, they cannot even take the pawn on e7, because if they do, there is a checkmate on c1. And again, because of this super pawn on h3, not allowing White king to escape. And it turns out that White do not have really a plan here, because they always have to be careful of the checkmate on the first rank. They play rook b1, which is a passive move to protect the pawn on b3. Queen c8, again, hinting that the first rank is very weak. Rook c1 is the threat of a checkmate. Queen e1 has to go back with the queen to protect the first rank. Queen f5, activating the queen. Queen f1. g5, rook e1, g4. The idea of this pawn movement is to protect the pawn on h3, and now the queen can go anywhere, and the White queen cannot take the pawn on h3, which is protected. After rook takes e7, queen f3, it turns out that the White queen cannot leave the square f1, because as soon as it leaves it, queen g2, checkmate. So White is basically playing without a queen. They also have 4 minutes on the clock versus 20 minutes for Alice, so the game is lost, but it still continues with a check. Rook has to go back to e1, and Alice simply takes the pawn on b3. Again, White queen cannot move. Rook d1, rook b2, rook e1, rook d2, and Alice is going after another pawn on d4 and just grabs it. And now she has an extra pawn. Rook b1, rook a4, the pawn on b7 is protected, the pawn on a5 cannot be protected, so rook e1, going back and forth for White, and rook takes a5, and now Alice has 2 extra pawns. Rook e3, seemingly active move, attacking the queen, but simply after queen d5, Black still have control of the square g2, so White queen still cannot move anywhere because there would be a checkmate on g2, and the rest of the game is simple. Rook e2, king f8, rook e1, queen f3, rook d1, rook a2, check, rook e8, rook b2, rook e1, and the pawns are marching forward. Rook a1, b5. Both pawns are marching forward. There is no way to stop them to becoming another queen. And white resigns here. They cannot take the pawn on a5 because of a beautiful move. A rook b1, pinning the queen. And again, remember, the queen cannot move, cannot take the rook because of the checkmate on g2. Beautiful game by Alice Lee. She now, after 3 rounds, has 2 points out of 3. If you like the content, I would appreciate if you like and subscribe. Leave a comment who you think is the favorite, who you think was going to win in the open section. Is it Fabiano Caruana, Hans Niemann, or maybe Wesley So, who is the current leader with 2.5 points out of 3. And in the women's section, we have a lot of great players, including Alice Lee, of course, including Irina Krush, including Jennifer Yu, and others. Thank you for watching.